He is the Spectre, the spirit of vengeance. When you hear that name, you think of wrath, don't you? Of a divine punishment that is absolute and terrifying. But the legend behind the Spectre is so much more than simple revenge. His power is born from a celestial balancing act, a cosmic struggle between God's unrelenting fury and the faint yet crucial whisper of human mercy. To really get the Spectre, you have to understand he isn't just the hand of judgment. He's the living battle between divine might and our own conscience. Most people know the Spectre as the ghost of a murdered cop from the 1940s, a phantom who dishes out terrifying, ironic punishments to criminals. And while that's true, it's just one chapter in a story that's literally eternal. His origins don't start in some back alley. They start at the dawn of creation. He is a force of nature, an angel given a terrible and tragic job. Today, we're digging into the ancient legend behind the Spectre's divine wrath. And we'll uncover how he's not just an instrument of anger, but the center of a complex theological tug-of-war. Long before a human soul was ever tied to him, the Spectre existed in a much rawer form. In the cosmology of the DC universe, the ultimate creator, the presence, needed an agent to carry out its judgment. This agent was originally known as the Spirit of Wrath. Its purpose was simple and absolute: to be the embodiment of God's anger. This wasn't petty human anger. This was a fundamental force of the universe, as necessary as gravity or light. And its work was on a scale we can barely imagine. When the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah fell to ruin, it was the Spectre who was credited with unleashing the fire that consumed them. The 10 plagues that crippled Egypt in the book of Exodus, the Spectre is said to have personally delivered each one. From turning the Nile to blood to the final devastating plague on the firstborn, in these ancient times, the Spectre operated without a human filter. It was pure, righteous fury. Its judgment was swift, absolute, and had no room for mercy. It punished the guilty, but its power was so immense, so all-consuming, that it was a danger to creation itself. Something had to change. The instrument of wrath needed to be reshaped. The entity that would become the Spectre was once an angel known as Aster. Now Aster had a complicated history. It was one of the angels who sided with Lucifer during his rebellion against heaven, but unlike the others, Aster repented. He sought forgiveness for his sin, and for his penance, he was given a monumental task. The presence ordered that Aster be stripped of his form and bonded to the raw spirit of wrath. This act transformed the wild force into the spirit of vengeance, giving it an angelic conscience and a will. This wasn't a reward. It was an eternal sentence. Aster became the Spectre, a vessel for a power that would scour the guilty from existence. His unending service was his path to redemption, a tragic bargain where he'd spend eternity defined by the very judgment he once faced. This adds a profound layer of tragedy to the Spectre's mission. He wasn't just a mindless weapon. He was a conscious being, a fallen angel forever bound to enact the wrath of the God he had disappointed. But this combination was still unstable. An angel's perspective, even one seeking redemption, lacked a true understanding of humanity. A final, crucial piece was still missing. Even with Aster's conscience, the Spectre was just too much. His power was absolute, his judgment final. A being like that, operating on a purely divine level, couldn't judge the messy world of mortals without risking its destruction. So, the Presence made a huge decision. The spirit of vengeance would be bound to a mortal soul. This would act as both an anchor and a filter, grounding the Spectre's cosmic power in the complicated reality of human experience. Enter Jim Corrigan. In the 1940s, Corrigan was a hard-boiled police detective, a tough guy with a furious desire for justice. On the way to his own engagement party, Corrigan was ambushed by mobsters. They murdered him and his fiancée, stuffed his body into a barrel filled with cement, and tossed him into a river. But his spirit refused to pass on. It screamed for justice, for vengeance. That cry was answered. The voice of God decreed that Jim Corrigan's soul would become the new host for the Spectre. This fusion was transformative. The Spectre was no longer just God's wrath or a fallen angel's penance. He was now tied to the rage, pain, and flawed human perspective of Jim Corrigan. Corrigan's own sense of justice, forged on crime-ridden streets, would now have to guide a limitless power. He became the mortal compass for an immortal force, the anchor meant to ground the Spectre in humanity. This fusion of the divine and the mortal finally reveals the Spectre's true purpose. He isn't just about wrath. He's the center of a celestial balance. First, you have his core function, vengeance. Is and always will be the spirit of vengeance, tasked with punishing the guilty. This is the raw power flowing from the presence, the force that topples evil. It's absolute and non-negotiable. But in DC's grand cosmic architecture, that force isn't alone. It has a direct counterpart, the Radiant, the embodiment of God's mercy. Where the Spectre represents retribution, the Radiant represents forgiveness. Their existence shows a fundamental truth about divinity in the DC universe. Wrath is balanced by mercy. This is where the human host becomes the most important piece of the puzzle. Jim Corrigan later hosts like Crispus Allen as the fulcrum on which these forces balance.
Ow!
The host's soul is the anchor that forces the Spectre to experience the world through a human lens. It's their conscience, their flaws, and their own capacity for feeling that acts as the final filter for the Spectre's wrath. The human host forces the spirit of vengeance to not just ask, is this person guilty, but also, is this punishment just? They introduce the human element of doubt, empathy, and perspective into a power that would otherwise have none. So, the Spectre is way more than a simple ghost. He's a theological battleground, all wrapped up in one being. He's the fury of God, the penance of a fallen angel, the conscience of a murdered human, all fused into a single tragic, terrifying, and awe-inspiring entity. His story isn't just about punishment. It's a deep dive into the nature of justice itself. It suggests that true divine justice can't exist as pure, unchecked power. It needs a filter. It needs a conscience. It needs a mortal heart to remind an immortal force what it truly means to be human. The Spectre is the living embodiment of that struggle, the eternal question of how to balance absolute justice with essential humanity. And that's what makes him one of the most complex and compelling characters in all of comics. But what do you think? Is the Spectre's brutal brand of justice a necessary evil in our world? Or is his power too terrible to ever be truly justified? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into comic book lore, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss our next one.